Our next presenter is Alan Pizarski, and Alan has done great work for many, many years, and many of you have probably read his excellent series, Commuting in America. But Alan is going to talk about the future of transportation and affordability. Alan?
Thanks, Mark. I'm not going to have anything as near as dynamic as Randall and Wendell. I'm going to kind of skate through where we are in some of these things and what it might mean for our future. I just want to start off by saying that the two things that I think are most important in transportation are travel time and travel cost, and those are the two things we know least about. The data we have is rotten, let me just put it that way. This thing sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. Yeah, did I skip one? Sorry, I just want to go a quick shot at here the average travel times in America. We had a lost decade. From 2000 to 2011, the average travel time was 25.5 minutes. So we had exactly the same travel times. We've now added, in the last 4 years, we've added half a minute. So this is a case where congestion is probably a good indicator of growth and economic activity. I stopped looking at the average travel times because there's obviously reasons for that not being very useful. And I started using this. We're now at 26 minutes average travel time. So I started looking at how many jobs, what percent of people can get to work in under 30 minutes. And in a car, truck, or van in the red bars, you see the national average is about 64%, but you see different metro areas there and the slide has eaten something here. This is what happens when you go from PowerPoint to whatever Randall's system is. And the transit average is about 19%. So I think one of the keys when we talk about disparate impact is what percent of the people can get to work in 30 minutes at 19% for transit. I compared that to 3+ carpools to transit, and I was amazed that, in fact, large carpools do much better than transit, even given the fact that most large carpools are going massive distances today. That's about all I can tell you about travel times. I do want to talk about consumer expenditures and where transportation comes out. This is a consumer expenditure survey. I took a little liberty with this slide and moved some of the pies around to make the point for Randall and Wendell. Can I call you Rendell? What happens is transportation plus housing comes out to about half of consumer expenditures. Keep that number in the back of your head because I think it's useful for a couple of things that we're going to be talking about. This is the long-term trend over the last few years. In transportation has been dead flat at about 9,000 a year. Housing has grown rather dramatically in just those 4 years. Medical is the green bar you see down there, which has grown rather astronomically in that period. And I think out into the future, we're going to see a situation where the share of transportation will decline because other things are simply growing faster. This is the long-term trend, and I'd say that we're not back to normal. We haven't been normal for 10 years. But going back since forever, 18 to 20% of people's personal consumption expenditures went to transportation. When the recession started, you see that we started to drop below 18% right in around here. And right around here is when everybody started talking about that there's a new world, forget it, nobody wants automobiles anymore. And now we're back. We were up here and I was saying, well, we'll hit 18% next year. And then somebody took the bottom out of the gasoline prices and then the other cost increases that led us to the point where we're about 17% now, but I expect we'll be close to 18% soon. But the main point is income levels are not back to where they were. Go back to that other chart, you see the dip, but the income levels on an inflation-adjusted basis, we're not back to 2007. In fact, I don't think we're back to 1998. It's been a very volatile period. This is vehicle purchases, gas and oil, other vehicle expenses, purchase transportation. The only one that's sort of stable here is vehicle expenses. That's basically finance and insurance. The dramatic shifts in vehicle purchases very sensitive to the economy. When gas prices go up, people stop buying cars. And when, of course, they lose jobs, they stop buying cars. And so we're beginning to just see the part of it coming back. Down at the bottom here is something that I call purchase transportation. That's a fiction that I've made up. I've been fighting the Bureau of Labor Statistics for 20 years. They called it originally public transit. And everybody thought they meant buses and trains. That also includes in their lexicon aviation, cruise ships, taxi cabs, anything you buy a ticket for. So I changed the name to purchase transportation. They have now changed the name to public transit and other. So that's their accommodation to where we are. I'll win this one eventually. This is where the shifts have occurred, just very quickly. Annual expenditures up, transportation spending down, purchase transportation nothing, gas and oil up, vehicle purchases down. Looking at some of that purchase transportation just for a second, even though it's only 6% of total consumer expenditures, this is the Bureau of Transportation Statistics trend data on aviation prices. The Airlines for America indicates $158 per passenger in 2000, up to $222 in the most recent period. And you see Amtrak costs rising really rather substantially, but from a very low number. Local passenger, almost useless data. That's transit in purple. Transit in green. The purple is Amtrak, and that's all the data they have on intercity bus. And I just need to make a small point on intercity bus. We've got this new world of discount intercity bus, and again, we have very, very little information on cost. People talk about it as being half the price of, Joe Schwederman at Chadwick Institute at DePaul does a nice job of tracking it. He's the closest we've come. There's a new study that he's just produced. He basically says intercity bus fares out into the future are about 50% less than Amtrak, which range to about 50% less than airfares in the range of up to 250 miles. And he shows sharp savings over just the variable cost of a single occupant vehicle, that is to say, just gas and tolls. So his average there is intercity bus $31, train $65, air $143, car out of pocket, he puts it at $45 as an average cost. This is averaging over a selected sample of the country. You'd have to do a very sophisticated study to get this to be anywhere better. We all talked about Uber and Lyft at lunchtime, no discussion of cost. The closest I've come is I've heard people say that Uber is about half the cost of a taxi cab, maybe 2/3 of the cost, but we don't have any cost information, and I don't think we'll see it anytime soon. What I want to call attention to is Uber pooling. You heard the mention of van pooling before. I think this has been true in the Department of Transportation. 20, 30 years ago, we all talked about the solution to almost all of our problems is van pooling, if you can just make it regulatorily feasible. Uber pooling may be the breakthrough that's in effect solving our carpooling, van pooling problem. Real-time pooling is just maybe it's just cab sharing, and another way to call it, but they've got it instituted now in 6 or 7 major metro areas, and they're saying half their ridership in San Francisco is now Uber pool. That could be a dynamic change in the society, massive impacts on transit, massive impacts on the cab industry. Washington, D.C. had this when I first came to Washington. John is shaking his head. He's probably the only one who knows in the room. You'd walk out and hail a cab, and they'd pull up, and they'd ask you where you're going, and if you were going where they were going, they had 2 other riders in it, you jumped in. It was made illegal. Sorry. Going to the automobile now, which is really where we need to talk about consumer expenditures. The main point of this point is we're now back above 3 trillion vehicle miles of travel. We hit that peak in 2007 and began this long slope, and this again is, of course, where everybody said that's the end of the automobile, forget about it. We're now at 3.1 trillion, up 3.4% this year. That's very largely a reflection to gas prices. My forecast with ASTRO is 1 to 1.4% annual growth out into the future. And that's, I think, basically based on population and some wealth potential. The key thing I think is worth pointing at, the second quarter growth this year in highway travel exceeded all total transit use in America. So we had a nice 3 months, I guess is what we would call it. One of the most important things I can convey to you, because you get hit with this all the time, in the advocacy analysis world, you hear talk of $9,000 a year is the average cost of owning and operating an automobile. And that is such an abuse of the statistics. What happens here is that the AAA constructs an estimate of if you buy a middle-priced car for 5 years and drive it 15,000 miles a year, this is what they estimate the cost will be. And to notionalize that into everybody's cost of operating a vehicle is ludicrous. There's a group, Randall will know the name, it's HUD, DOT, and EPA, Sustainable Development Partners or something wonderful like that. They use this all the time to prove what a terrible thing it is to force people to own automobiles. I had AAA write letters to all 3 secretaries, 2 secretaries and a director, saying this is an abuse of their data and should not be used in that way. They haven't quite gotten around to changing it yet. This is what actually happens. This is the decile of population, and this is consumer expenditures per vehicle. $4,000 at the lowest deciles. It gets up to that half of about $9,000 when you get up to the people in the 8th, 9th, and 10th deciles, where in fact, if you see this, you'll see that's where the new car purchases, that red bar, crosses over used car purchases. Most Americans buy used cars. I haven't bought a new car in 25 or 30 years. I have 3 cars in the family. The newest is 10 years old. One of the great things we have done in America, and this is something we should add to the cost factor, is we have made vehicles that last a long time. The average age of a car is 11 years old. People can start out and buy a 10-year Toyota and have an excellent vehicle to go to work in. This is the total transportation share of spending by geography, which has disappeared in our system. This starts with the smallest metro areas. This is 100,000 up to the big metros, which I think here is 5 million. So you do get a shift in transportation costs with increasing size of metro areas. This is a simpler way to look at it. Central cities, this is share of total spending. Central cities about 15, 16%, 17% in suburbs, 20% in rural areas. And so, yes, you do spend more if you're farther out in a different area. However, if you add housing and transportation, which is what I think is the useful comparison, you basically get 50% everywhere. But in fact, you get 51% in cities, 49%. This is very small differences, 49% to 50% to 51%. But those numbers have been the same for the last 20 years that I've been looking at these data. So there's a real, of course, the house ownership in the rural and the suburban areas are also much greater. The key is workers per household. If you look over here, you see a single person with no worker in it spends about $2,800 a year on transportation. If they work, they spend another $2,800. And the same thing is true of households with multiple workers. So basically, each added worker adds $2,800 in spending on transportation. And I think that's key to understanding what's happening. Transportation expenditures is associated with labor. A quick thing on prices, you know it's been very volatile, but the fact is, what we were spending here, if you look at it on an inflated basis, is exactly what we were spending in 1979. We get so excited about gas prices. A couple of years ago, we hit $4 a gallon. It was the same as what we were paying on an inflated basis in 1970. And then if you look here, if you look at the fuel efficiencies, you come out to about 18 cents per mile in 1976 versus 10 cents a mile today. So actually, again, fuel efficiencies are really paying off in decreased transportation costs. Gas costs about a third of all consumer expenditures. I want to close with this key point. There's been a major change that's happening. Ethnicity, gender, all of those things are disappearing as being significant in transportation. What's happening is women's travel is more like men's over time. It's closing the gaps. We even have a case now where women actually are a greater share of women drive alone than men to work. When you shift over to race and ethnicity, we had 43% of the population without vehicles in the black population in 1970, now down to 20%. At some point, all of these, the Hispanic, the general population, will converge. I'm not quite sure that we can call that a bad thing, although I'm sure there are people who will be upset about it. If you look at the mode shifts, carpools, Hispanics, Africans, who have been the mainstays of transit and carpooling, have all shifted towards the single occupant vehicle, even though this was during the recession. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if things get better. I'm just going to close with a point about vehicle autonomy, which we discussed a little bit earlier in the sessions. Just to simply say we will see an increase in VMT with vehicles, expanded user base, which is what Mark mentioned. But that'll shift costs. We're not quite sure what that will mean. Rather than you're driving your parents somewhere, some other vehicle, an Uber vehicle or an autonomous vehicle will be taking them. Lower costs will come from travel time, from operations and maintenance, shifts in ownership alternatives. Who knows who's going to own the vehicles? It could be Uber, it could be Hertz, it could be General Motors, it could be us. It could, God forbid, be government. We don't know how that's going to play out, honestly. What that does mean is that it'll change the fixed versus variable costs that we deal with. And safety and reliability, insurance are clearly going to decline a significant cost. System capacity design and personnel costs will all really shift. And there'll be mode shifts. So all of these costs, I think, will add up to a more productive future. So I think I can stop with that. And well, I'll just simply say that the tyranny of distance is what we're in the business of overcoming, all reducing the time and cost penalties. If we can do that, we create much greater opportunity, and I think that's a major goal for all of us. Thank you.